back in his natural habitat. Good afternoon. Who's up first?
Well, I have one right out of the chute.
Yeah.
Could you sort of explain a little bit more what you meant by some people equate signs of patriotism with white nationalism? You didn't give any specifics, and so I just was trying to understand what you meant there.
Sure. Yeah, look, it was the indictment of the Twitter culture that, somebody posts something that they believe is, patriotic or supporting the country, and then people start equating motives to them that didn't exist. So what I said in the speech, Gary, was, look, those two things are not the same. In fact, being patriotic and loving America is a rejection of things like white nationalism or any kind of doctrine that divides America.
Can I ask you something about just the way the House conducted itself today?
Sure.
In this regard? There was moments where about a dozen maskless members on the floor. Are you concerned about that? And is it also a harbinger that you may not be able to get through a real session here if there are virus being contracted by members?
No.
It's going to be complicated.
No, I don't think that's that. The members, all the members that were tested, that were in the chamber, tested negative. The individual members, I think that you're mentioning, were in fact tested prior to coming into the Capitol or being around people or being at their desk today.
Did you have your members were tested? All the members were tested before today?
All.
I'll get back to everybody without
Yeah, Jen will get you the specifics, but I can.
There wasn't a specific requirement or official mandate that they get tested.
No, I think that John's question was about people who are wearing masks. As far as I know, John, Jenna can get with you with the specific.
No,
So it
But
sounds like there were some positive tests.
but anyone who was wearing masks, which I think was not wearing masks, which was your question, was tested.
Were there positive tests of some House members, and that's why they weren't on the floor today? You had several members who weren't there.
We had positivities, yes.
Is anyone in the chamber positive?
No, because they said they were all tested, and they all tested negative if they were in the chamber.
Florida has the 12th highest death rate per capita of coronavirus. Given that, what is the legislature's role in addressing the crisis?
Look, I think that this is the reason that we created the Pandemic and Public Emergencies Committee, and it was a standing committee. It wasn't a select committee as we've done in the past after things like hurricanes. It was really to go back and take a look at all the things that took place. How can we be prepared for future pandemics and future public emergencies? It's one of the things I mentioned in the speech today was how, whether it's on hurricanes and things that we don't want to be reacting, we want to get ahead of a problem. This is something we've never had to deal with before, not just the legislature. No governor's ever had to deal with this. So it's unique, and we need to take lessons learned from it and figure out how do we make Floridians more prepared for the future.
But the pandemic's still ongoing, so like if a Floridian tests positive for the virus and still needs to go to work, but doesn't have serious symptoms, well, it seems like that's a place the legislature could step in and create a program or some kind of opportunity for that Floridian. What do you see as the role of government?
Sure.
Given that the pandemic is still ongoing?
Well, look, you mentioned work, which is something I spent a lot of time talking about. And the reality is, whether it was somebody who was on unemployment or whether it's somebody who now is working from home or working remotely, the idea of how we deal with work in Florida is wildly important. And I mentioned that we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars over the years on these fragmented workforce systems that only measure the inputs and not the outcomes for Floridians. That's something that we should change. It's even more important that we change it and that we live in this new environment. I also mentioned that there's opportunities coming out of the pandemic to look at how we do things in different ways. So, for example, people who might now be engaging in remote work on more of a permanent basis, is there an opportunity for us to promote places in rural areas for them to come and to live and to work? And in doing so, should we invest in things like rural broadband to make that more possible?
You are talking as if the pandemic is a rearview mirror, and so you want to address things going forward, but it's not the rearview mirror. And Florida's economy isn't going to return until tourists start coming back, and the way they can come back is when they feel confident that Florida is a safe place to be.
Yeah, I don't think I'm at all focusing on the rearview mirror or treating it like it's in the rearview mirror. I mentioned in the speech that it's impacting our families, impacting our communities, our schools, our churches. My point is, if somebody is out of work, or the question that I was just asked was, if somebody's having a different work environment or they're concerned about their workplace or they're out of work, what do we do? My point is the best thing that we can do for people as the legislature, and the role of the legislature, is to eliminate those barriers that are making it difficult for them to work, or if they're out of work, figure out the best way to make sure that they can get a job that they want, that's going to give them a sense of purpose, and make sure that they have the ability and the resources to know where that job is, how they can find it, and how they can become qualified to get it.
So just as a follow-up, is there anything the legislature can do to help people so they don't return to work when they are maybe asymptomatic but are testing positive? Because as evidence has shown, we don't have a good contact tracing program. We have no idea what our contact tracing programs are showing about clusters, but we do know that asymptomatic people are causing a great deal of the spread.
Yeah, I do think part of the challenge here is that we're also still learning a lot about this virus, and that changes on a fairly regular basis. So I don't know how businesses would feel about that. I think one of the things that we've done is to allow employers to engage with their employees in that conversation and consult CDC guidelines and do what they think is safe based on medical advice. Part of that is I think where COVID liability probably comes into play, to making sure that businesses who are doing the right thing, who are trying to follow the latest science and the latest CD guidelines, are protected against a frivolous lawsuit later on.
Do you see federal stimulus as being vital to Florida now for putting together a budget and continuing unemployment benefits? Or are you okay with, if Congress cannot reach an accord, going ahead and cutting the budget?
Look, I think we come into this, myself and President Simpson, looking at, cutting the budget. And that's what, we're not going to base our decisions based on what might happen with the federal government. You all have been here a really long time, so even when we have things like hurricanes and we're, quote, guaranteed funding, reimbursement from places like FEMA, we may never get that by the time, the term ends in the 2 years. So we never base our assumptions on our budget based on what might take place. We'll certainly be watching it, John, and anxiously seeing what the federal government will do. But I think the CARES money obviously helped us get through financially. As we come into this new session, we'll look at, trimming the budget in places that we need to make up for any kind of shortfall.
Now, that trimming may be pretty deep, and it would seem to be education and healthcare is where the bulk of it goes.
Well, look, I mentioned higher education and looking at higher education as center to our budget conversations this session.
Have you, Chris, did you communicate to the membership about the members who tested positive and what their status is and so forth?
Yeah. No, that would be their private health information, so we wouldn't communicate that. There was not an opportunity. Those people were coming to town. They were scheduled to take a test. They weren't, in the building socializing with members or anything like that. To the extent that there were issues where, if it was a staff member or something like that, you'll have to ask Jenna about about any particular tracing issues.
Last night's event in Goodwood. The people that tested positive, none of them were at the
Correct.
event.
That's correct.
You knew that they were positive prior to that event?
Correct.
Mr. Speaker?
Yes, ma'am.
Kind of changing the subject a little bit. You talked a lot about law enforcement. Based on that and based on the governor's proposal of combating violence, what would you say the chances are that that gets passed? And are there particular parts of it that you like better than the others?
Sure. Look, I stood next to the governor at the press conference when he announced that bill. I think it's wildly important that people who are, driving to work or taking their kids to school, don't find themselves in a situation where they're surrounded, their car's surrounded, and people are jumping up and down in their vehicle or looting or rioting in businesses. So I think it's important that we send a signal that that's not the kind of behavior that we allow in Florida.
Is that something that you know has happened in Florida?
Yeah, actually, the car I was thinking about happened in St. Petersburg, the one I had in my mind when I was just describing it. There's a car driving down the road, it's surrounded, somebody gets up on the hood. I mean, you can imagine how terrifying that would be if you're just driving down the road and that happened to you. That shouldn't happen to anybody. It shouldn't happen to anybody in other states. It shouldn't happen to anybody in Florida.
David, we go back to the pandemic stuff. One of the pieces you have talked about really is the liability protection.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate doing some sort of, is the House teeing up a package of liability protection stuff? And what do you anticipate that looking like? What are some of the things you're considering in that silo of all?
Sure. Yeah, we're looking at COVID liability. I think that, certainly it's something that I think that we should do, that would give businesses confidence to be able to operate. I think what you're asking is, hey, kind of what are the details?
What does that look like?
Yeah, and I think, look, this is what this today was about, right? Is, the organization session to get members' feedback on what that should look like. I think we all agree it's a problem that we need to figure out the best way to solve, making sure that people who were going about it kind of the right way, trying to do the right thing for their customers and employees, don't get, blindsided by a frivolous lawsuit, while making sure that if somebody is doing the wrong thing, that they're still held accountable.
So you wouldn't endorse blanket immunity for some of these essential businesses as some associations have called for?
I don't even know how you would do that, right? Theoretically, there's probably the made-up version, right, of somebody who's doing something really, really sinister and terrible. I don't think any of us would want to give anyone like that a blank check. I also don't know of anyone that's even an allegation that that's happened, but certainly as we do this, we have to take all of those things into consideration.
That would seem to need kind of a better contract-basing program to figure out who got what where. That would imply that, is there anything the legislature is going to do or do you want to do to improve the state's capabilities in that specific
Yeah.
regard, as far as contract tracing and figuring out, A to
Sure.
B?
Look, I think that, one of the things that this House, I think, has done really well anytime we've had a crisis, now most of them have been hurricanes, right, is to go back and say, all right, what are the things that worked, what are the things that didn't work, where can we improve? As I said in my speech, I think all professions, all things can improve. And that's one of the reasons we created the standing committee for, pandemics and public emergencies, was specifically to look into things like that. What's the latest technologies? I also believe that one of the things that's going to come out of a pandemic like this is a lot of innovation, because the market has now rushed to respond to various different things. People have different kinds of masks, for example. Some of them are made where I live in Pinellas County. These are different kinds of innovations that happen. I think we're going to see, various forms of technology innovations that we need to look at.
Going back to the budget situation real quick, would you rule out any sort of revenue increases or fee increases to address the budget situation? Senator Simpson mentioned the online tax sales.
Sure.
Tax bill, but not exactly, which he does not consider a.
Yeah, I'd rule out tax increases, which, but what you're suggesting is, something like the sales tax collection on something, sales tax already exists. There's a sales tax in the state of Florida. So, but anything that, Senate President Simpson, wants to have a conversation with, I'm absolutely open to talking to him about.
Including tuition increases, because he put those on the table, and I'm curious, given what you just said about a sales tax, like
Sure.
it already exists, therefore it's not new, would you think that a tuition fee increase, because tuitions exist, that to increase tuition would not then require a special 2/3 vote?
Look, I'm open to talking to him about a lot of different topics. What I said today in the speech, though, about higher education and degrees is that we shouldn't be subsidizing, I think, as taxpayers, every degree to the same degree. I think we need to figure out what it is that is important for our state, what pushes us forward economically speaking, and there should be an incentive for universities to want students to be in those degrees, and not all those degrees should be funded at the exact same level.
What kind of rules are you considering for committee weeks in session in regards to containing the spread of the virus
Sure.
within the building, in terms of contact tracing, how long members would be out, or whoever would be out, staff out if
Yeah.
they do have the virus?
Sure. Well, as you saw through the memos that we released for organization session, we had a number of protocols for people to come up here. We also elected, while we were up here, Brian Avila as our speaker pro tem. He's also doubling, you may have read, he's kind of our COVID czar for all things COVID in the chamber, getting with our staff as far as protocols. So at the appropriate time, that gives members plenty of time to plan. We will have a similar rollout like we did for organization session, where we'll roll out to the members and their staffs. These are the COVID protocols for the beginning of committee weeks.
Given that President President-elect Biden received over 4 million votes in Florida, what does it mean that top leaders of your party, including Governor DeSantis, have yet to acknowledge his victory? Will you do so?
Look, there's legal battles that are still happening, and there's a time certain, just like, we're no stranger to this. In the year 2000, there was legal battles well into mid-December. It's not something that has been unique to the electoral process. So that's going to play out over the next couple of weeks. And there's a time certain for it to end. I think, and I've said this from the beginning, I think as everyone else has, I believe every legal vote should be counted. I think every illegal vote shouldn't be counted. What I would say for us as Floridians is that it's pretty good, I think, for the state of Florida to look across the country and to say, look how better our laws and the implementation of those elections are considered the rest of the country. And if you look at those states and you look at how they deal with early voting and counting absentee ballots and how long they wait, I think what you'll find is that they're about 20 years behind us on updating their statutes as it comes to election law.
Given the budget situation in terms of trying to find a little more wiggle room perhaps, is there more of an opportunity this year than other years to change perhaps the 85% rule, allow some in the criminal justice system, allow people to get out of parole later?
Well, considering you asked those two questions together, right? So I don't look at public safety as a cost-saving measure. If something is protecting our families or keeping them safe, I don't think that's something that we can afford to let go of. If you're asking kind of a separate question about, hey, will you look at bigger reforms to the Department of Corrections because they make sense from a policy position and don't put our families at risk? I meant what I said. There's an open door to talk about those kinds of things. But government does exist to protect people, and it's one of our foremost priorities.
Regarding Can you tell me how you describe how Donald Trump has changed the party since he started, and what you learned this election cycle about what your party needs to do to keep his voters engaged?
Well, look, I think that, Floridians, delivered a landslide for the president by our standards, right? 3% in Florida is a landslide. It might not be for other states, but it is for us on statewide elections. And I think a lot of that has to do with, the president was willing to call out as a Republican, things about government and how government operated and push back. Look at us. Last session, you all were here covering, drug importation was one of the bills we did in the House. I don't think any of us could think of an American president who would have done what Donald Trump did, pushing back as hard as he did against pharma, and probably even a bigger achievement, pushing back against kind of the deep state of CMS to say, hey, we're gonna do this and we're gonna make this happen. So I think that that's a lesson for Republicans to say, look, we should push back as hard as we need to. We need to be as bold as we need to if it's in the best interest of Floridians and the best interest of middle-class families.
Is relying on drugs from a socialist healthcare system from Canada, a bold conservative?
The pills are the same pills.
Can you comment on workers' compensation? Do you see that being part of any kind of liability legislation? And do you feel, as given the fact the rates keep going down year after year after year, that there needs to be workers' comp changes this session?
This is one of those issues where, several years ago, if you would have asked me, I would have said, oh my goodness, we need to do, workers' comp. And I think one year we passed it, the next year we passed it on week 1 of session. And then to your point, rates kept going down and down and down. And I think that now the kind of the prevailing wisdom is, maybe, don't fix something that's not broken at the moment when it comes to, workers' comp and the rates. So, I'm most certainly, willing to look at it, but I think certainly the rate trends are a good indicator.
And just as a follow-up, do you feel like that the state needs to do something with workers' comp claims as they stem from COVID infections and exposure? Frontline workers who are getting infected or other people getting infected.
Sure.
Should that be a...
It's something we can take a look at in the pandemics committee and see if, there's anything there that we need to do to modernize any of our laws.
Last question.
You talked about you talked this morning about the Republicans' past love affair with the private sector.
Yeah.
And your references to quasi-public entities that are not accountable. Can you put some more meat on those bones? What you're going to talk about there?
Sure.
Expressway authorities, what are you talking about?
I think all of them, right? I mean, expressway, literally everything. And at some point maybe we'll do this, right? If I got to roll out, in kind of paper form, the amount of boards, councils, taxing authorities, special districts. Last time I checked, we had like 1,200 special districts in the state. If we rolled those out, literally nobody would fit in this room. Nobody would be here. It is vast, totally uncharted, and absolutely unaccountable. My point was, Steve, was that some of it were kind of relics of the era when Democrats were in control, and some of them were created by Republicans. But the Republicans, one, were more about the private sector, thinking that, hey, we would get market and innovation and all these things by doing it this way. And the reality was, they acted that way when it came to, pay and perks and junkets and things like that, but not when it came to, innovation and so forth. So I think when it comes to those things, considering that they have such a vast authority to tax and regulate spending behavior, that those are things that we should look at and make sure that those that are not producing outcomes are eliminated, and those that are have transparency and accountability.
All those groups are represented here. That seems to, not here, but in Tallahassee, that seems to be putting some folks on notice. Is there anyone you just, a blanket of these organizations, or a blanket umbrella of these organizations, anyone in particular that needs to be put on notice? Are you looking at any of these specifically? Because generally when a speaker says something like that, there's been a little bit of research, there's been some understanding of a direction that he wants to take he or she wants to take the chambers. Is that the case here?
Look, I think if you are one of those entities, if you're one of those boards or taxing authorities or entities who's kind of been able to operate in the darkness and not have to worry about your outcomes, then yeah, I would be worried. I would be worried that we're going to demand that those outcomes are measured. You should be worried that we're going to want transparency. And if you're not producing outcomes and you're not being transparent and there really is no positive use for you, then yeah, you should be especially worried, because we'll look to eliminate you.
There's not a specific subset that you're looking at specifically?
No, it's actually more of it's a massive structural example. I think when I mentioned the Tiffany Carr situation with the Council Against Domestic Violence is, there's an example of something that we all agree. If we all said, hey, would you think that we should combat domestic violence? All of us would say, absolutely, of course. And yet here's an entity that was enriching someone's private pocketbook instead of looking out for people who they were supposed to. And I think what it certainly opened my eyes to is that this can't be the only one. And we've known from my time in the legislature that when we lift open the couch cushions, we never know what we're quite going to find. Well, we're going to lift open the couch cushions and we're going to see what we're going to find. All right. Thank you all very much.